You don't expect betrayal to come with a polite smile. You don't expect it to hand you a coffee the morning it decides to cut your throat. And you certainly don't expect it to look you in the eye and thank you for your contributions, while the knife is still lodged between your shoulder blades. But that's how it works in the real world, in the polished, air-conditioned corridors of startups and corporate stairwells. Betrayal isn't sept messy. It's sept efficient. It comes with talking points, HR jargon, and a follow-up email titled Transition Plan. My name is Emma. I'm 25, and I was foolish enough to think that loyalty still counted for something. When I first started at Valitech, I thought I had made it. Everyone does, at first. The company had that new money startup smell, kombucha on tap, standing desks, open concept everything. They gave me a laptop, a sleek black hoodie with the logo embroidered on the chest, and a swipe badge that I wore like it meant something. Like I meant something. Braden Vale, yes, that Braden was the CEO. The man who could pitch an entire roadmap in 10 minutes and still have time to flirt with the female investor from New York. Tall, sharp, absurdly articulate. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine about power you didn't earn but somehow still deserved. He called me sharp in our first meeting. I remember that word exactly because it felt like a razor. It felt like a door being cracked open. Sharp people go far here, Emma, he said, sliding his Mont Blanc pen into his shirt pocket. Stay ahead of the curve and you still never be left behind. That was all the gasoline I needed to light myself on fire for him. I didn't take lunch breaks. I came in early and left after dark. I memorized board preferences. Learned Braden's calendar so well I could anticipate his needs before he even voiced them. I studied the way he liked his briefing binders structured. No fluff, just bulletproof data. And for a while it worked. He leaned on me, trusted me. I was his second set of eyes. When investors flew in, I coordinated it. When a partner pulled out of a pilot program, I stayed up until 2 a.m. rewriting the deck so the fallout looked like strategy. People noticed, some were supportive. Most weren't set. One VP, Chad, of course his name was Chad, once joked that I was the CEO SEP's emotional support assistant. I laughed, out loud, in the meeting. That was my first mistake. Then came Isabel. It started with a few emails, vague introductions, meetings she was suddenly invited to. Her title didn't mean much at first, Director of Public Relations, a role created specifically to, as Braden said, polish our perception as we scale. She was stunning. That kind of cultivated, expensive beauty that made you feel like you were in the presence of someone who had options. High cheekbones. The kind of heels that clicked with purpose. Always a blazer, always a new designer bag. And she knew Braden. You could see it in the way she spoke to him, familiar but just reverent enough. She didn't defer. She maneuvered, she landed with confidence and subtle domination. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. I convinced myself it was just office politics, that I was overthinking things. But the signs started stacking up. Braden handing her tasks that used to come to me. Her showing up in strategy meetings that had nothing to do with PR. A sudden push to streamline executive access that resulted in me being cut out of calendar syncs. Then one night, one long quiet Thursday evening, I overheard them. I was staying late, putting together a financial projection pack for a last-minute board prep. I had to print it. Braden still liked to annotate on paper like it was 2003, and as I walked down the glass hallway toward the executive lounge, I heard her laugh. Not the public laugh. The private one, the one she saved for moments that were real. Braden was laughing too. And then, her voice, soft but distinct. You can keep her around forever. She sets smarter than she looks. Followed by his reply. She sips useful, until she sips not. I froze. That was all I needed to hear. My usefulness had an expiration date, and apparently it was approaching fast. 3 weeks later, it happened. The meeting was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on a Friday. The invite was vague, catch-up and realignment. I showed up with a notebook, half expecting a shift in scope, or maybe a new set of deliverables. Braden didn't even pretend to drag it out. Emma, I still be direct. We stopped restructuring executive operations. We stop hired a communications forward EA to support the next phase of growth. You still be offboarding this week. No apology, no warmth, just corporate speak delivered like it was a weather report. I felt my ears ringing. My body was still, but my blood was sprinting. Did I do something wrong? I asked, already knowing the answer. He didn't set flinch. This isn't set about performance. It's set about alignment. Alignment. That word made me want to scream. When I left the building that day, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or flip the bird to the security camera like I wanted to. I just walked out, past the front desk where Isabel stood talking to HR with a coffee in hand, smiling like she already knew my parking spot was about to become hers. That was the moment I knew. They didn't just fire me. They erased me. I didn't go home right away. I walked. No destination, no direction, just forward. Past the glittering office towers, the food trucks lining up for the lunch rush, the bus stop where the same guy was still talking to himself like he had been the week before. Everything looked the same, and I hated that. I hated how normal the city felt while my world was actively collapsing around me. I ended up at a bookstore, of all places. Some overpriced, minimalist hipster haven, with mood lighting and cold brew on tap. I sat there for 2 hours with a book open I didn't read, staring at the pages while my brain played everything back on loop. Isabel's smile, Braden's tone, the way I felt so damn small in a room I helped build. It wasn't just a job I lost, it was my sense of control, of direction. I had traded years of my life for an illusion. Braden's illusion. I didn't tell anyone right away, not my mom, not my best friend back home, not even the old roommate I still talked to when things got weird. I couldn't bear the sound of sympathy in their voices. I didn't want comfort, I wanted clarity. I wanted to make sense of what happened, and more than anything, I wanted to find the part of myself that had vanished behind spreadsheets and executive summaries and 2 a.m. texts from a man who never saw me as anything more than useful. So I sat in that bookstore and started writing. Not a letter, not a rant, just a list. All the things I had been asked to do that didn't feel right. All the decisions I watched Braden make that made me pause. All the access I still had, quietly, unintentionally, or maybe conveniently, left untouched. That's sisters when the idea started. Not revenge. Clarity. And maybe justice if I was lucky. Back when Voletech was preparing for its next round of fundraising, Braden had ordered the integration of a secure data archiving system. It was meant to store executive-level communication for regulatory purposes in anticipation of their IPO ambitions. Guess who helped manage that onboarding? Me. And guess who never had her credentials revoked when she was fired? Also me. The system wasn't flashy. No GUI, just a clean command line interface, and a search function that only someone familiar with the internal tagging structure would know how to use effectively. And I did. I remembered all of it. So that night, hours after the severance email hit my inbox and Isabel's LinkedIn mysteriously updated her title to Executive Communications Manager, I logged in. I didn't dive in head first. This wasn't some angry ex-girlfriend story fueled by Red Bull and spite. This was methodical, quiet. I made lists. I cataloged internal emails. I flagged memos and financial summaries, cross-referenced dates and file names. What I found was worse than I expected. It started with simple things. Clean numbers presented to investors that didn't match the working documents I remembered editing. Revised board presentations that omitted entire risk sections. Weird bonuses processed through shell consulting firms. And then I found the Slack transcripts. Not the current ones, the archived logs, hidden in a backup that hadn't been scrubbed yet. There was a message chain between Braden and the CTO, time-stamped 3 months prior. CTO, we've got a problem. Security breach. Third-party vendor. PII exposure likely. Braden defines SITs likely. CTO 99%. Braden, we're about to close Series C. This doesn't exist until after. CTO, understood. Deleting thread now. I stared at the screen for a long time after reading that. Personal identifiable information, user data, email addresses, phone numbers, possibly even credit card data. Braden had buried a breach to secure funding, and worse, he had involved his CTO and made it vanish on command. I didn't just have an ethics violation, I had potential SEC-level fraud. For 2 days, I debated what to do. I weighed the cost. If I reported it, there was no guarantee it would go anywhere. If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit. Braden might never face consequences, but at least I wouldn't either. But then I remembered something Braden said to me once, casually, in passing, in that way people do when they're not paying attention to what their words mean. We were on a flight to Seattle, meeting with a partner firm. He was annoyed because someone had leaked internal metrics to a tech reporter. He looked at me and said, "It's always the quiet ones, the ones you think are loyal. They're the ones who know how to gut you without ever raising their voice." That was the moment I decided. If he thought the quiet ones were dangerous, it was time to show him just how dangerous I could be. There's something terrifying about holding power you didn't ask for, the kind that could ruin someone, not through drama or destruction, but with cold, clinical precision. I wasn't angry anymore. That's what scared me the most. I wasn't trembling with rage or plotting revenge with dramatic music in the background. I was calm, focused, like I was executing a systems audit with one goal: expose the breach, metaphorically and literally. I didn't take it to HR. That would have been useless. HR worked for Braden, not for justice. And whistleblower protections are only as good as the people enforcing them. I needed someone outside. Someone who didn't owe him a thing. So I reached out to a woman I'd met once at a Women in Tech roundtable, a journalist named Dana Trent. She was sharp, cautious, and known for exposing corporate misconduct with surgical accuracy. She owed me a favor. I cashed it in. I didn't send everything at once. I packaged the files in layers, anonymized names, internal metadata intact, scrubbed of anything traceable to me, unless someone really dug deep. Braden had taught me how to control a narrative. Now I was using that same playbook against him. Dana didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The data spoke for itself. A week later, it began. The first article was clinical. Nothing splashy, just enough to raise eyebrows. Concerns emerge over data practices at tech darling Veritech. No accusations, just questions. Then came the storm. Once it was clear the SEC had opened a formal inquiry, everything spiraled. Investors started pulling back. Board members started clarifying their involvement. Emails leaked, Slack threads surfaced, and suddenly Braden wasn't a visionary CEO anymore, he was a liability. Isabel disappeared from LinkedIn. Veritech issued a statement about leadership reevaluation in light of emerging compliance issues. Braden tried to spin it. He released a personal letter on the company blog about the burdens of leadership and how visionaries are often misunderstood. It was desperate, wordy, full of vague humility that didn't land. He stepped down 2 weeks later. No press conference, no farewell livestream, just a sterile headline in TechCrunch. Veritech's CEO resigns amid ethical investigation. I watched it all unfold from the same coffee shop where I first drafted my notes. This time, I sipped my latte slowly and smiled at the quiet irony. Braden was finally learning what it felt like to be erased. But this wasn't just about taking him down. Something changed in me after that. I started consulting again, slowly, no agencies, no platforms, just referrals. The calls started coming in. "We heard what you did. We're looking for someone with your kind of eye. We need someone who doesn't flinch when the cracks start showing." I became the person companies called when they wanted to avoid becoming the next Veritech. And not long after, I got a message from someone I never expected. A board member, one who had barely acknowledged me during my time at Veritech. He asked to meet in person, cautious, respectful. Over coffee, he told me, "We knew something was wrong, but no one had the guts to say it. You did." Then he offered me a position. Not as an assistant, not as a fixer, but as director of strategic risk at a mid-sized firm rebuilding its entire leadership team. "You once did report to a man like Braden," he said. "You will replace him." I took it. Not for revenge, but because I earned it. People think justice is a loud thing, a courtroom gavel or a shouting match or a final punch before the credits roll. But that's not real life. Real justice is quiet. It happens when no one is looking. When someone like me, sitting behind a desk, unravels a lie with a mouse click and a file folder. It happens when women stop asking for seats at tables built to collapse under them and build their own. Braden's world fell apart because he underestimated me. Because he thought loyalty was silence. And that's sips the mistake they always make. They teach women to be useful, not dangerous. But I was both. I always have been. The strange thing about rising from ashes is that nobody tells you what to do once you're standing again. Everyone talks about survival like it's the final chapter. Like the moment you get out, expose the lie or burn the bridge, you're magically healed. But it's not the end. It's the start of a quieter war, the one where you have to learn how to live in a world that watched you bleed and said nothing. After Volatech collapsed, people from my past began resurfacing. Not all at once, not with grand apologies, just little messages. A DM here, an old coworker liking a post. Saw the article, you were right. These small acknowledgements trickled in like distant echoes of validation. It didn't fix anything, but it reminded me I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't crazy, I was just early. For a while I kept a file on my desktop labeled unsent. It contained emails I wrote but never delivered, one to Braden, one to Isabel, one to HR, even one to myself. Pages of thoughts, raw and unsanitized, full of things I never got to say. I told myself I'd delete it one day, but I never did. It became a scar I could visit, not to relive the pain but to remember the lesson. What no one tells you is how good power feels when you finally have it. Not the kind that crushes others, but the kind that protects you from being crushed again. I started carrying myself differently, not louder, just with more certainty. Like I didn't need anyone's permission to speak anymore. And it showed. One afternoon, about 6 months after Braden's resignation, I was invited to speak on a panel. The topic was ethical leadership in the startup era. I laughed when I got the email. The irony was poetic. I almost didn't go, but something in me knew it mattered, that I needed to stand on that stage and say out loud what so many of us keep buried under NDA clauses and polite head nods in meetings. The day of the event, I wore the blazer I bought the week I left Volatech. I had saved it, tags on, waiting for a day that felt like a reclaiming. The room was filled with founders, VCs, startup operators. The same crowd that once celebrated Braden. I took a deep breath, walked to the front, adjusted the mic, and told the truth. Not just the data breach, not just the affair or the internal corruption, but the subtle stuff. The daily undermining, the invisible weight women carry when they're both indispensable and disposable. I didn't name him, I didn't have to. Because the moment I described that feeling of being praised publicly and pushed aside privately, I saw heads nod. I saw recognition. I saw quiet rage. And I saw something else too, gratitude. After the panel, people came up one by one, not to flatter. Just to thank me for saying what they could instead. And in that moment, I realized something Braden never did. Power isn't just about who speaks the loudest. It's about who makes others feel safe to speak at all. One night, months later, I ran into Braden. It was completely unplanned. A rooftop mixer for tech professionals. I was invited by a friend of a friend who thought it would be good exposure. He was across the room, standing alone with a drink, watching the crowd like someone who used to be worshipped there. His face hadn't changed much, but there was something different in his posture, smaller somehow, not humbled, just faded. He saw me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then, like muscle memory, he smiled. The practiced, PR-friendly smile that used to work on everyone. It didn't work on me. I didn't smile back. I just held his gaze for a moment longer than comfort allowed, then turned away and kept walking. That was the real victory. Not the articles, not the new job, not even the standing ovation I got 2 weeks later at a private equity roundtable. The real win was this: I didn't need revenge anymore. I had outlived him. Closure doesn't come with confetti. There's no cinematic music. No moment where the clouds part and you're standing on a mountain with the wind blowing through your hair, victorious. Closure is quieter, slower. Sometimes it doesn't even look like victory. It just looks like peace. For me, it started in a grocery store. I was in line, buying overpriced oat milk and a loaf of bread I knew I wouldn't finish. A woman in front of me turned, did a double take, and said my name. Emma. I blinked. I hadn't heard my own name said like that, uncertain, half recognizing, in months. It was Michelle. She used to work in legal at Valitech, a mid-level compliance manager, quiet but smart. She always kept her head down, stayed out of politics. She looked different now, relaxed, glowing. Her eyes didn't carry the stress I remembered seeing in the elevators at 8:45 a.m. We made small talk. She was at a different company now. Happier, she said, more aligned, better culture. And then she paused. I never told you, she said, lowering her voice slightly, but I read the files, the ones you leaked, before they disappeared from the system. I saw what you did. I tensed. You were brave, she said. You saved more people than you know. Then she smiled, squeezed my arm gently, and walked away. I stood there holding oat milk, suddenly heavier than anything else in the basket. That moment stayed with me. Because up until then, I hadn't thought of what I did as brave, just necessary, just survival. But maybe the line between courage and desperation is thinner than we think. Maybe it's not about doing the right thing because you're fearless. Maybe it's doing it because you can't live with the silence anymore. After that, things unfolded slowly. I started writing not about Brayden, but about power, about systems, about how women like me are groomed to be silent assistants in someone else's empire, until one day we realized we were the architects all along. I gave workshops, traveled, sat on panels where people actually listened, not because I was the loudest or the smartest, but because I had lived it. I had looked power in the face, been cut by it, and still walked away with my spine intact. At one conference, a young woman came up to me after my keynote. She was maybe 23, nervous, holding a notebook like it was a shield. I just started my first job in tech, she said. They make me feel small all the time. I think they are afraid I sept smarter than I let on. I looked her dead in the eyes. Good, I said. Let them be afraid. Just don't set. Let them shrink you. She nodded, and I saw it, that flicker of something. That quiet fire, the one I had nearly let them extinguish in me. I still keep the framed severance letter on my bookshelf. People ask about it when they visit. They expect some horror story, a reminder of a trauma I haven't healed from. But that's not why I keep it. I keep it because it's the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped living for someone else's approval and started fighting for my own narrative. It's not a scar. It's a badge. Because I didn't just survive betrayal. I built something stronger out of its remains. As for Brayden, he started a podcast. Of course he did. It's called Scaling Ethically, Lessons from the Edge. Every few months, someone sends me a clip or a screenshot, and I roll my eyes. He talks about transparency now, about lessons learned. He uses words like resilience and empathy like they're new additions to his vocabulary. But he never mentions me. He never mentions the woman who knew where the bodies were buried because she dug the holes for him. And that's fine. I don't need credit. I don't need revenge. I don't need to burn anything else down. Because I already built something better. You don't forget the people who tried to bury you. But you don't owe them a thing once you've bloomed past where they left you. And sometimes, just sometimes, the loudest justice is a quiet woman who lived. If this story hit home, share it. Someone else out there is sitting in silence, thinking they're alone. But they're not. Subscribe for more long-form stories of betrayal, karma, and poetic justice. Because when they underestimate the quiet one, that's when the story begins.